Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. It is summer in the northern hemisphere and the temperatures are of course rising. Big surprise. And that is exactly what our mainstream media and the political apparatus are using now as an opportunity to present us with the next crisis, overlapping crises we have right now. Everywhere in the newspapers and on TV, you see these scary, dark red colored maps, these temperature maps in the weather report, and they talk about heat waves and forest fires and drought and whatsoever. And as you can imagine, the way that they're framing this is not that it's just a particularly hot summer or that some people must be careful, like old people and people who work outside. No, no, no. Of course, this has to do with climate change and it's all man-made and it is all just caused by a single factor, and that is CO2. That is, of course, nonsense, at least in my humble opinion. And in today's presentation, I want to talk about a couple of topics that are related to this. One of that is temperature and temperature measurements. The other one is water. And I also will talk about forest fires that for some reason the media claims has something to do with near surface temperatures. But before we get into that, I want to thank all my supporters and my subscribers. Like, share, and subscribe. I should tell you that I'm also active on other social media platforms. If these are more convenient to you, you should check me out there. And if you feel like it, you can support my work via Patreon or Subscribestar. Alright, so just now in July, a record high temperature for this year has been recorded. No, in summer, the highest temperature of the year? That's crazy, right? That's so newsworthy. It is not a record temperature for Germany. It is just the highest temperature of the year so far, and it's in July. Well, that really is newsworthy, I think. High temperatures in summer? No. So if you look at the temperature records in Germany, it was measured by the end of July 2019, a little bit over 41 degrees Celsius. That would be a little bit above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. What they don't tell you is that in 1952 there was a temperature measured that was 39.6 degrees Celsius. So it is lower, but it is very, very close. And that was 1952. So if everything climate related should go up exponentially and all those feedback loops, shouldn't we have way higher temperatures right now than we had 70 years ago? I'm just asking for a friend. But of course, peak temperatures are not the entire story. There is a certain grid, a certain mesh of meteorological stations, of temperature measurement stations in Germany. And these timelines, the really reliable ones, they go back until 1880, I believe. There were temperature stations already back then. And now we still have, of course, this kind of grid. And then from these measurement points, I believe the temperature model then calculates the temperature on a regular grid over Germany. Now, what they never really address is that these temperature stations, as you see here, they have existed for a long time already. And how should I say that? Well, the environment there locally changed very much. So in the beginning of the 20th century, if you were at a university somewhere and you were about to set up a meteorological test station or a data collection site, where would you build that? You would build that close enough so that you can go there, because there is no internet connection at the beginning of the 20th century yet. So and you don't want to be inside of the city, I guess. So you would build them near a forest or a meadow or near a little creek, but close to the city. Now, what happened during the 20th century? Of course, all these metropolitan areas were growing, and what used to be a lush forest environment is now probably a parking lot with a factory, an autobahn, and a railroad next to it. And of course, a lot of commercial and housing sites or buildings. This local infrastructure effect, of course, raises these temperatures significantly. If you have concrete, glass, and steel, it heats up way more in the summer than a meadow, a forest, and a creek. And some bushes. And now let's take this record temperature for this year. It was measured in Hamburg, in Neuwiedental, and let's look at this meteorological station in detail because it is a great example for what I just told you. Now, Neuwiedental is a relatively new part of Hamburg, and it was planned in 1959 as a new part of Hamburg. As you can see, there are really high buildings there are huge parking lots, there are factories, there is an autobahn nearby, there is a railroad, all that stuff that I just talked about. And when was this meteorological station? When was that started? When was the data collected there? Yeah, 1962. That was a time when hardly any buildings were there. And now look at it. This is exactly what I'm talking about. In 1962, the construction of this entire quarter had just started. And only in the 70s, it was really beginning to grow. And right now, of course, you see from Google Maps here, yeah, you see this huge parking lot. You see this factory. I think you get the point, right? This is exactly an example for what I've been talking about. And of course, this local infrastructure effect raises the temperatures there. And that's not only true for this measurement station, it's true for many, many of them. Of course, at the top of the Zugspitze mountain or something, it's a different story. But I also have to add that some of these measurement stations are actually at airports. So what is an airport? It is several square kilometers of concrete and of pavement. So yeah, I think it behaves a little differently than a forest or a wheat field. So that is why, in my humble opinion, everything we can see in these average temperature timelines, in these record temperature news, is that, the buildings, the environment, the infrastructure around the testing sites has changed since 1880. Yeah, that's so surprising. Crazy, right? Now let's get to the next topic. We have a bunch of forest fires right now in Germany, but also in other parts of Europe. And of course, the media spins it in a way that, this is because of climate change. Yeah, well, if you look at it, there have been experiments where they tried, there are certain hypotheses, I should add, that if you throw away glass or bottles, that there is some kind of a lens effect, and this lens creates a focus for the sunlight, and that ignites the forest floor. Complete nonsense. Yeah, you would need temperatures of 200 or 300 degrees to start a fire with really dry leaves or dry grass on the ground. And in experiments, they could never find that any kind of glass you would throw away, any kind of broken glass or bottle bottoms or something like that, would ever create a focus sufficient to start a fire. So that's a complete myth. If you look at the forest fires in Germany, where the origin has been clarified, the number one leading reason or origin is deliberate fire starting. Yes, people set these fires on purpose. So how does this have anything to do with climate change? And most of these fires, or at least the biggest number of them, the biggest category, is just fire starters. And then it's of course the carelessly thrown away cigarette butt. Once again, has nothing to do with the climate. It's just people, careless people. But also machinery like trains and agricultural machines, vehicles, they can get really hot in summer, the bottom of these vehicles, and they can actually set the very dry vegetation below on fire. Yeah, that's one reason too. But it also has to do, once again, with people and not with the temperature. Even if the outside temperature were 100 degrees Celsius, that would still not start a forest fire. Of course, there is an indirect connection that you need very dry conditions for a cigarette to start a fire. Yeah, in a wet forest, you can throw away 15 cigarette butts and it doesn't really matter. But you can also have dry conditions in winter. And once again, well, if the reason is actually humans and the only weather reason is indirect, then I wouldn't really attribute it to that, really. And then there is another point, and that is the water. Yeah, let me tell you, I have experienced summers growing up in the 80s, but also in the 90s. There were certain summers where it was not allowed by the communities to water your lawn or flowers or something like that. Only a vegetable garden, like if you grow plants for consumption, produce, then you are allowed to water this garden. Otherwise, you are strictly forbidden from watering your garden. And well, this summer, wait a second, I haven't heard anything like that yet. So I think the water shortage in Germany cannot be that severe. And this was every couple of years. I mean, it wasn't extremely rare. It wasn't every summer that the communities banned people from washing their cars and watering their lawns and flowers, but it definitely happened a couple of times during my youth. It wasn't unheard of. It wasn't rare. It was a common occurrence, but this year and in the last years, I haven't heard of it. The other thing is that water here in Europe, in Central Europe, is not really an internationally traded good. Water resources are very local, and in Germany, water is there in abundance. And it goes as far as that if people really try to save water for the planet, then they actually have to flush the piping system, the water supply system, with fresh drinking water in order to have some kind of flux there, so that these standing water doesn't cultivate like bacteria or maybe fungi or something like that. So for hygienic reasons, they have to flush the whole system with drinking water, also during the summer, if people are really trying to save water. And once again, there are actual times of water shortage, and the communities and the media, they let you know that during that time you're not allowed to wash your car, for example, in your driveway. But once again, this is announced, and these are special situations, very local, and I haven't heard of this year. So I think there is no water shortage. It's just a hoax, actually. And also these temperatures. Let me say one more thing about the temperatures. When I was young, we had temperatures that were as high as to make the bitumen on the pavement melt. Yeah, again, locally, but it did happen. Yeah, it was insanely hot back then, and of course no ACs and so on. And we definitely had above 35 degrees, and sometimes it went near 40. So it wasn't really a totally different order of magnitude or something, or very, very much colder or cooler than it is now. That is a total hoax. And young people, they probably think in summer in the 80s it was 20 degrees in Germany. No, it was 35 degrees. And especially in southern Germany, the climate tends to be more continental. We're further away from the ocean, so that means it's colder in winter, it's hotter in the summer, it's normal. But it is mostly people from the north who move south, and then they wonder, oh, why is it so hot? Well, it's because our climate here is different. It's more continental. And also another point that I really want to add is people who complain about heat waves and the heat and it's unbearable and we're all gonna die, they're usually city dwellers. Correct me if you made different experiences here, but according to my experience, and throughout my whole life, I lived in villages and small towns in Germany. I never lived in a big city, but I have connections and contacts to city dwellers, professionally, of course, at my workplace. But I have never experienced in my whole life that a person living in a rural area, or someone who grew up in a rural area just like me, complains about heat in summer. I've never heard that, ever. It's always city people, and yeah, of course, because of the reasons I mentioned in the beginning of this talk, it is more uncomfortable in cities. It is a couple of degrees warmer in huge crowded cities with a lot of concrete and steel and glass and running ACs everywhere. Yeah, it is uncomfortable in the village, with forests and fields and hedges and little creeks. It's actually very comfortable, and people also like when it's a little bit warmer every now and then they can relax, they can barbecue, they have a beer in the shade. It's nice. So at least to my personal experience, people in rural areas, they don't really complain about the heat. They can live very well with a couple of weeks of warmer weather, and it's always these city people that complain about that. And surprisingly, they are also the ones who are in favor of all these really dystopian green policies, these New World Order policies. Like, they have noticed now what they can do when people are afraid. They can have lockdowns for the China bug. And of course, they also want now climate lockdowns. That is what they're talking about now, that in order to save the planet, and it's always 2 years, right? In 1990, it was, the next 2 years are crucial. Then in 2005 it was the next 2 or 3 years, and then in 2010 it was the next 2 years, and now again in 2020 they tell us that we have 2 more years in order to turn it around. And yeah, we need climate lockdowns, of course. You are not allowed to drive a car anymore, just like you're not allowed to wash your car when there is a water shortage, right? And of course, this engineered and artificially created gas shortage in Germany, that is also, either they like it is convenient for them, or, well, my opinion, as you can tell from the words I used, I think they created that on purpose so that they can really get people, they can give people one more reason to get into those climate lockdowns and make their peace with that idea. Anyway, so this was my little presentation today about the dangerous heat wave we have in Germany. And by the way, if you remember correctly from the excess mortality data I was showing in the beginning or the middle of 2020, you saw there was always this little but very significant spike in summer in Germany in excess mortality, no matter what year you look at. And yeah, that is excess deaths from heat, of course, because as I said in the beginning, when really old people don't really know that they're thirsty anymore and they don't drink enough, or people who work outside, or they have to run a marathon in the middle of August, there are always, statistically speaking, there are some people who can't handle the heat, or who do stupid things, or who just, their bodies can't handle it, and yes, it leads to a significant spike in the excess mortality signal, but that has existed since forever. This is not a new thing. This is not a climate change thing. This has always been the case in summer in Germany. It's completely ridiculous to use that now all of a sudden and just abuse the fact that many people don't know about this little spike in summer in excess mortality, and they can sell it to them as something completely new. Anyway, let me know what you have to say about that in the comments down below. And as always, let me know what happens in your country. That would be very nice and convenient for me to read under my videos. So long, Servus, Kameraden.